Drum roll. All right, so good morning, everyone. My name is Jesse, and I am with Exploring by the Seat of Your Pants. For those who don't know, we're all about bringing conservation, adventure, and science into classrooms around the world. Today's particularly exciting for us. We've got a bevy of hangouts. It is World Water Day, so we're meeting with people who work on water all around the world, groups that work with water. Just finished a hangout with the aquarium. It's a really important day, and thank you guys so much for joining us. Right now, we've got 5 classes from across North America, so I'm going to give them a chance to do a bit of a shout out. We've got Mr. Respressa's class, grade 6s from Stockbridge in Georgia. Hi, guys.
Hey.
Hey, there we go. We've got Miss Evans's grade 6s from Haines in Oregon. Hi, guys. We've got Miss Lewis's grade 10s from Stockbridge in Georgia. You guys are officially the loudest grade 9 and over group I've ever heard, so thank you for that. Way to go with the enthusiasm. We've got Miss Gale's grade 7/8 from Sharwood Lake, Ontario. If we can that was very high pitched. That's pretty good. All right, and then we just had Miss Balla's grade 6 and 6 through 8 join us from Prairie Grove in Illinois, but I can't mute your mic. There we go. Perfect. Hi, guys.
Yay.
Hey. All right. Of course, the reason you guys are all here today is for our speaker. We're joined live by Simon Jankowski, who's a water engineer and explorer from Western Australia. His journeys have taken him to Cambodia, to the States, through Australia, figuring out ways to help solve the problem of water in the world, which is an increasingly difficult thing to do with climate change, people overusing water resources. So Simon is going to walk us through his work and showcase the great work he's doing to save the world, basically. So thank you so much for joining us today, Simon. And without further ado, take it away.
Awesome. Thanks so much, Jesse. Man, I'm so excited to join you guys for World Water Day. I'm an environmental engineer from Australia, so please excuse my accent. It might be a little bit strange, might be a few words that you haven't heard before, but hang with me because I'm going to take you through 3 adventures that I've been on to really investigate water supply. And this is my job. I try and help people to get access to water in areas where there just isn't that much water, in dry areas, in areas where there's contaminated water. And it's super important for us because we drink it, we bathe in it, and importantly, our food is grown from the water supply that we're able to use. So we've got to work with our environment to get water. So look, I'll tell you a little bit about myself. I'll just share my screen. There we go. So I'm from a town on the west coast of Australia called Perth. And there it is with the arrow. And it's a beautiful sunny place. There's loads of water around during winter, but it's super dry the rest of the year. My passion is water. I love the ocean. We've got some fantastic beaches around where I'm from. I love going crayfishing. Here I am hanging out with my bud Ron. We're about to go out and catch some lobsters and catch some octopus. And there's also some pretty scary looking things in Australia. We have some of these guys swimming around the beaches, but they're okay because they're not really after us. They're more interested in what they eat, which is seals. So they love a good tasty sea lion or a couple of fish. Funny story. This picture was taken of a sea lion that was eating a big chunk of octopus. It looks like he's sticking his tongue out, but it's actually an octopus he's eating. And the shark was actually circling a couple of 100 meters away. So I don't know what happened after this picture was taken, but that's the kind of ecosystem that's sort of living off the coast where I'm from. And it's super exciting to be able to see that. So here's a picture I took of my local reef down the road. And I wonder whether you guys can spot the fish that's camouflaged and hidden in this picture. So I'll give you a minute. It's called a stonefish, and it's a really spiky fish. And if you step on it, you'll know about it because you'll be hurting for days afterwards. So there he is. He's hidden on the bottom. And it's so cool to see this because he's hidden there and he's waiting. He's hiding from us and hiding from his prey. And when a fish comes along, he's going to go chomp and just eat it and then swim off. So very cool place to live. We don't have kangaroos around where I am, unfortunately, but we do have these little guys, and these are called quokkas. And they're funny little creatures that live in the desert, and they live on the beach, as you can see. And the cool thing about quokkas is that they don't drink water at all. So no drinking through their entire life. They survive by purely eating green shrubs and green food. And so they have adapted to this really dry environment that they live in. And this is the dry environment which we're trying to survive in Australia. We're trying to use water from this dry place to survive. So that's my job as an environmental engineer. I am trying to get water from wherever we can. In Australia, a lot of the water is underground because there just isn't that much rain. And so here's a picture of us drilling a well into the ground. And we're using that water to help a mine site to process gold. So we do a lot of these wells. We do them for gold. We do them for agriculture and for water supply for drinking. So, I mean, Australia is a unique case, and I'll take you straight to the center of the country. So I'm sure you guys recognize this picture. This is called Uluru, and it's the red center of Australia. It's where the Indigenous Australians, Australian Aborigines, they've lived there for 50,000 years in this really dry environment, which isn't very hospitable. So all the plants are spiky. You go out there, you get bitten by ants. It's pretty nasty, but it's a beautiful place to be. And the reason they can survive is that they know where the water is. And they know that they can follow the stories which they were told when they were kids, and they can follow the songs which they learned in their cultural dances. And that tells them that, oh, we can just go to a waterhole, which is 60 miles north of here. And so they can travel across the desert by following these water features. The interesting thing is that in recent times, these tribes have moved into communities, and they're living on the land in sort of bigger population centers. And so water is becoming a bigger problem because they can't just travel to the next waterhole if this one dries up. And so this is where I came in as an environmental engineer to try and work out how these guys can get water supply for the town that they're in. And this town is only 100 kilometers or 160 miles west of Uluru. So what we do is we head out there with a geophysical device called a magnetometer. And here's my colleague Adam sporting the latest in magnetometer backwear. And what it does is it sends out this magnetic pulse into the ground. And what's reflected back tells you whether it's rock underneath the soil or whether there's water-laden sand underneath the soil. And this is pretty cool because in Australia, the picture on the left there shows you in Australia, the rivers don't run on the surface. They run underground. So you guys may find this really weird because in North America, there is so much water on the surface. You can always see surface water. I came to America and I had never seen surface water in such volumes before. So how does it run underground, under a river, underground? Well, it's not running through a pipe. It's not running through a big cave. It's actually water that's sort of trapped between all the sand particles. So I'll go a little technical for a second. This is kind of what it looks like. This is a cross section of the land. You've got soil underneath the trees and the grass. And if you, say, spilt your bottle of water on the ground outside, the water disappears, but it goes somewhere. It travels down between all the little gaps in the sand particles, and it ends up in the water table. And that's the saturated zone, which is also referred to as an aquifer. You may have heard of that term being used. And the interesting thing is 2 billion people around the world use groundwater as their primary source of water. So it's really significant to understand how this system works. So in this town in Warrakurna, we traveled around, we found some good sites in which we could potentially dig a hole, put a well in where they could draw water from the well and use that for the town supply. But on the north side of town, we found this site. And this was really weird, that there was this surface water feature that they weren't using. They were pumping water into this pond, and we asked them, why aren't you using the water, which is clearly quite good north of town? And they told us that it's camel water. So there are wild camels roaming around the desert, and the camels have an insane sense of smell. And when they smell water in town, they come into town and they break into people's houses and break the faucets and the taps off and drink the water. So these guys, to make sure the camels don't come to town, they sort of give them this pond of water outside of town to keep them happy, which is this really interesting connection between the environment which provides them water and it also kind of takes away. So they're trying to find this balance between the camels trying to take it and them trying to drink the water as well. So bigger picture, I wanted to show you guys a really cool diagram of what we actually have on Earth. So there's a finite amount of water. There's a set amount. And if you pulled all of that water and you made it into a big ball, like a giant bowling ball, so this is all the oceans, all the rivers, all the ice caps. If you put all that into one ball, it would be the size of maybe a quarter of the United States, that massive bowling ball. But of that water, if you were to take all the fresh water out of it, it would be that tiny little pea over the eastern states. And that's the entire world's supply of fresh water. And you go, well, hold on a minute. How can we all be running our taps and running our showers and only have that much water for all the continents in the world? Well, I bet you guys have heard of the hydrologic cycle. So this is how we get fresh water. The water evaporates off the ocean because the ocean's pretty warm in places. It's kind of like the steam rising up off your soup. And it rises into the air and it condenses and it becomes these big clouds. And then when the clouds move over the land, they rain, or if you're super lucky, they snow on the mountains. And when that water, that snow melts, it makes its way down a river, and the river flows down, and generally it's trapped in a lake or it's trapped in a big reservoir. And from here, we pipe that water or channel it like this in California. We channel this to our houses, to our cities, and then we filter the water in a big filtration plant. So this is a reverse osmosis plant in San Diego. It's actually filtering saline water, but it does the same job. And I was super lucky to actually be able to go and check it out. And then I was also able to try the water coming out the other end of the plant. And it was, as you'd expect, it tasted like absolutely nothing. It was completely neutral. There was no toxins, nothing in it. It was beautiful water. And I guess this is why we are so lucky in Australia and in the US and in Canada, because we have access to such good quality water. We have these big filtration plants and the infrastructure which gives us a resource which a lot of the time we kind of take for granted. Whereas in the rest of the world, there are billions of people who don't have access to the same water that we have. And that's kind of what took me over to Cambodia. And I reckon you guys could point Cambodia out on a map. Well, you can on this map because it's labeled. Cambodia is this little country in Southeast Asia, and it's wedged between Thailand and Vietnam. And they have a lot of water contamination issues in Cambodia. So they've got a lot of water because they get the monsoon. It flows in every year. It's a crazy amount of rain that falls and all the rivers fill up. But there's also a lot of unhygienic practices in the country, and there's a lot of livestock which are basically defecating into the water. And so you have a lot of bacteria and issues. So I worked in Cambodia on the eastern side. There's a jungle on the Vietnamese border, and it is an amazing place. It's called the Sema Sanctuary Zone, and they have wild leopards, they have wild tigers, they have bonobo monkeys, they have toucans, and the coolest thing of all is that they've got wild herds of elephants. And it's just like the Jungle Book being in this place. I was camping there, kind of on the edge of the jungle, and the first night that I was there, I was absolutely terrified because, believe it or not, elephants kind of don't make the noises you'd expect. You think an elephant's sort of tooting is, or making like whistle sounds or honking sounds, but what they do is they actually sound like dinosaurs. So they actually roar to each other at night, and they roar to each other so they can tell where the others are, so they can find each other at night. It's crazy. So there's nothing like going to work each morning and hearing these guys, these big elephants, sort of crashing through the bamboo and pushing their way through the forest. So I was lucky to go out here, and I would highly recommend you guys check this out if you can get over to Southeast Asia at some point. In this same forest, there was indigenous people called the Bunung people. And this is a view of the village, which I was working in. And these guys have been there for thousands of years, and they survive based on the jungle. So they take care of the jungle takes care of them. They get all their food from the trees, from the bushes, from the animals there, and they get their medicines from there. And they make sure that the trees aren't chopped down, that there's always enough animals around, and they take care of it. And it goes as far as nowadays that there's hospitals kind of in the next region. If they're really sick and they need to go to the hospital, they'll actually chop down a tree and sell that tree for wood, and that will pay for their hospital bill. So it's kind of their lifeline and their health insurance policy, which is really cool. So the problem that they were having is that they were getting water from this stream, and they'd go down there twice a day, and they'd take these big bottles of water, these empty bottles, they'd fill them up, put them on their bike or drag them back up the hill to the village, which they were okay with. I mean, they've been using water this way for thousands of years, so it's just part of the lifestyle. But the problem is people in town were getting really sick from the water. They were getting diarrhea, and the kids couldn't go to school because they were too unwell. And so they were wondering what they can do about it. And that's why we got brought in as environmental engineers to go in and test all of the water sources to this river. And so that's exactly what we did. I worked with a Cambodian NGO, and they paid for water tests, and we went out and we trekked through the jungle, and we took these bottles and filled them up with the water, and then took them to the lab and got them tested. And what it showed is that some of the bottles had a lot more bacteria than usual, and they kind of corresponded to areas where farmers had been moving into the area and clearing forest. And then the animals being on that land, well, when it rains, all the cow pats and all the animal waste had been traveling down through that cleared land. The forest was no longer filtering it out as it used to do. And then that was contaminating their water source. So we got together. This is us going and testing the water supplies. That's a really cool crew of guys who are helping out, trekking through the forest, avoiding leeches where possible. We got the village together, and we showed them basically through putting bottles of water with various degrees of dirt in them, sort of showed them a map of their water and showed them where they can get their water from and that's not contaminated, and where all the sites are contaminated. And they really made the choice. They said, right, well, we don't want to use that dirty river. We want to use the well further upstream, or we want to use the spring further upstream. So they were really stoked that they then had this information to go on, because for them, if they had got sick, they usually blamed it on the spirits in the forest. They wouldn't look to their water supply. So to bring this sort of scientific side to it, they were really happy that they then had this access to good water, and they ended up building a project and putting some tanks on the town so they could store the good fresh water for the dry period. And afterwards, they took me on a tour of the jungle, which was super cool. And on the left-hand side, that is what a wild banana looks like. So bananas exist in the wild. I did not know this. And it looks like cookies and cream. I assure you it's not cookies and cream. It tasted pretty bad, which goes to show how well farmers have really bred bananas, that we've got these delicious things that we can eat. They also took me for a fish barbecue. They caught all those fish and roasted them over the coals for us. It was really, really cool experience. So this brings me to my final adventure that I want to tell you guys about. So I'm working at the United States Geological Survey in California on a Fulbright scholarship right now. And what I'm doing is trying to help the farmers to get access to water supply so they can grow the food that we all eat. So a little known fact that in North America, 50% of all food is grown in the Central Valley in California. So have you guys heard of Central Valley before? It's just this little strip of land back from San Francisco all the way down to Los Angeles. And the water that they need to grow this food, it comes from the Sierra Nevada mountains. So it comes from the snow, it goes down the rivers, and they use that to irrigate crops like oranges and almonds and pistachios and strawberries. All your berries and nuts and fruits and vegetables come from this region. And it's super critical that we keep this region healthy because it provides so much food for the country. They grow 80% of the world's supply of almonds here as well. So the problem that they've been having over here is, well, climate change has been changing the rainfall regimes in the area. And so they've been having these really long droughts. And the droughts last for 5, even up to 10 years. And what it means is that they don't have the water to water their crops, and so they can't farm. So what they've been doing is using the groundwater reserves in the area. The problem with doing that is that this is a cross-section of how you use groundwater. So what they do is they put a big well in the ground. And remember, this water is water between the grains of sand. It's not a big lake underground. It's kind of trapped in between all the sediment. They stick a well in the ground and they suck it out like a straw in a thick shake. And they pump that water onto the land. Now, when you draw water out of the ground, the water table level drops. And just like a sponge, when it dries out, the actual land drops as well a little bit. So if you have clay in the soil, the clay kind of compacts and the whole land surface just ends up dropping down the lower the water table goes. And they've measured this in the Central Valley. This is a picture of one of those bores pumping water onto the surface to irrigate a bunch of rice in the fields. And this is a super famous picture of a guy back in the 70s who was measuring how far the land has dropped. It's called subsidence. And it's dropped 30 feet over those years, over those 50 years. So that picture is basically where he's standing at the bottom of that pole. If he were there 50 years earlier, he would have been standing right at the top by 1925. So the entire landscape has compressed and dropped down in elevation. Which you may go, well, what's the big deal with that? Like, why is that important? Well, the problem is that when you lose that, when the ground drops, you lose storage capacity in your aquifer. So you have less room to store water in future. And the other thing is, when the land drops, everything cracks. And this is the water transport canal. This is the kind of the artificial river that feeds Los Angeles water supply. So when you drop a certain section of the land and another section doesn't drop, it ends up cracking the infrastructure. And these cracks mean that those canals don't flow anymore. In fact, some canals are actually flowing backwards during the dry season. So it's this really bad situation where they've taken too much water and they're trying to get water back into the ground. And that's kind of where I come in. This is the project I'm working on at the moment. I'm trying to help them get water back in the ground. And so the way we do that is we try and work out which farmers' fields can accept water. And during a flood, they kind of flood the fields and the water sinks down through the soil and it ends up at the water table, and that land kind of bounces back up again. So I'll show you what I'm doing. It's a little technical, but it gives you a good overview. So in California, they're trying to solve this problem of not having enough groundwater. And the way they're doing it is in that top right picture, they're actually flooding fields of grapes. And so they're vineyards, and they'll flood the field and it will sink in through the ground. And the picture on the left is what I'm doing. So I'm creating this map of the entire Central Valley in California and trying to give them an idea as to where you can put water in the ground and where you can't. So red is obviously bad zone and green is awesome zone. And we're trying to test this out so that these guys can have groundwater into the future, which will save them during the dry years. And which means that America still gets its supply of oranges, its lemons, its lettuce, it's all its vegetables and fruits that you might not like eating, but are really important to the economy and to the world. So that's what I wanted to show you. I really wanted you guys to have a think about where your water comes from, where you live. So if you're living somewhere near mountains, then that's where your water supply is coming from. Over in California, we get our water from the mountains from snow. And the cool thing about snow is, this is a picture that I took a few weeks ago of the first snowman I've ever built. He's not very good, but I was pretty proud of him. The cool thing about this snowman is when he melts in spring, he'll flow down the river and he'll either be used on the crops and he'll become an orange, or it'll become some lettuce, or it'll become an almond, or it'll flow down to Los Angeles or San Francisco or one of the communities, and they'll use that in their shower. And, you know, who knows? I may end up drinking this snowman in summer. So that's what I wanted to show you guys. And I want you guys to go home and try and figure out where your water comes from. Does it come from the mountains, the snow? Does it come from underground? Does it come from the ocean? Because we've really got to take care of our water supply and make sure that it's there for the next generation.
Excellent. Thank you so much for that. It's good, too, for talking with students in Canada and the U.S., where camel attacks in the desert are not an issue, something where your journeys across the world have been really insightful into this issue and the different challenges people face. So thank you so much for that. All right. We also have 10 groups watching online, including a group in India who's been passing along questions. So I'm going to go through the classes, and let's get started with Mr. Respress's class. You guys have a question? Come on up.
Anybody has a question? You can come up here. Ryland. Come on. Okay.
Why did they not do water?
So you'll either have to come up to the computer, or someone who's near the computer will have to pass it along, because we can't hear you from that far away. Sorry. Take your time. No hurry. All good.
Why did they not make the camel water first before the camel started to attack?
That's a great question. I think they learnt by experience on that one. So they kind of wanted to take all the water themselves because they needed enough for town. And they kind of learned, well, hold on, if we have all the water, then all these animals are going to start coming to us. And so it was kind of the horse before the cart. They took all the water themselves, the camels attacked town, and then they went, oh, gee, we should probably give them a little bit of supply, because otherwise this problem's going to keep happening. So I think they solved the problem over time, and they went, right, well, let's give them a little bit of water. So good question, though.
Awesome. All right, let's go to Ms. Evans' class. You guys
Okay. So we have about 50. Okay, so we'll move over here. So Oregon, we have about 50% of our water capacity
So we have about 50% of the water
stored in the mountains
in the mountains
that we normally have.
that we don't have.
So what can we do?
So what can we do to like get more water?
Yeah, awesome question. So it's a drought year this year. It seems there's not as much snowpack as there is on an average year, and that's a big problem that we're trying to work out. And I guess the biggest thing that we can do in cities and in towns is really to conserve water. So to have shorter showers and to be really aware of, washing the car or washing the dog, not using too much water. The big problem going forward, like longer term, you've hit on a really good issue. It's that these years could start to get more common. And so we won't have as much water to work with. And in California, it's so dry over here normally, and they're working out, longer term, what can we do? And over here, they're doing sort of different water saving techniques. Like they're getting rid of lawns on the front of people's houses, and they're putting in these little succulent plants and cacti and water sensitive plants. So it's kind of taking the way California used to look, kind of a desert landscape with cacti and plants, and kind of bringing it back and making it look cool on people's lawns, which I think is really awesome, because grass actually takes 5 feet of water in height per year to keep it green. So it's incredibly wasteful in terms of water use. So as time goes on, and you've got 50% water in the mountains at the moment, you've got to conserve this year, but then next year, if it stays that way, you've got to start thinking longer term and getting water sensitive washing machine and getting rid of grass and getting some plants which are more sensitive to that water supply.
Awesome. All right.
Awesome.
I'm really happy you brought up the xeriscape lawns like in California and Vegas and stuff. It's awesome. All right, let's go to Ms. Lewis's class. And if you guys have a question.
Let's see. They're coming.
Yeah, good.
Oh, why is it so expensive to remove salt from ocean water?
Oh, great question. Yeah, that's a really interesting question, because that's realistically our future water supply. If we don't get the rain, then we have to get water from somewhere else. And if we don't have it in the mountains, if we don't have it underground, then we go to the coast and we start pumping water out of the ocean, and we have to pull the salt out of the water. And it's really expensive in energy. So when you have salty water, the way that they get rid of the salt in the water is they push it through this super fine filter, and the filter actually filters out the molecules of salt. So the sodium and the chloride in the salt gets squeezed between these the filter openings, and it takes so much pressure to do that they usually have like an energy plant, a power generation plant right next door to power the whole process. And you get this great fresh water at the other side. In fact, it's actually distilled water. It has nothing in it. So they have to add all these minerals back to the water so you can actually drink it, which is kind of wild. But it's so costly because there's so much pressure required. So we've got to take care of the water that we do have, because we can just pay for it, but it's going to cost a lot to desalinate that water.
Excellent. Great question. Great answer. All right. Quick question. I'm going to pass along the one from the class in India that's watching. When you're talking about Cambodia, they asked, do indigenous people not filter their water there in any way? Do they boil it before they drink it? What's going on?
Yeah, that's a great question. They do filter their water. They do boil it as well, but it's kind of it's interesting. It's not really a cultural practice to do that. So it's very unusual for them to actually boil their water. They don't have much wood to burn on their stoves, so it's quite costly to boil water. The filters that they have they probably could do a better job. That's a really good point. And I guess the reason that they don't is in the past, they haven't been very, very good at keeping track of their filters, and they can't afford to pay for new water filters. So it just kind of hasn't worked. So they were looking for more creative ways to go back to the source. You know, it's one of those issues where you really want to attack it on two fronts. You want to make sure that your water supply is clean and you keep it as clean as possible. And then on the other side is to filter the best water that you have available. So both of those solutions work in hand. And I think they're trying to get more water filters in the area. I guess this is being in India, you guys would really be aware of this, and you'd have some great filtration systems. I'd be really interested to see sort of what filtration systems you guys use.
So on that line, actually, so Simon, if there's a group that wants to get in touch with you, you have a website and email that people can get in touch if they needed to?
I do have an email, yeah. Do you want me to throw it up on the chat, or I can put a business card up to the...
You know what? We can pass it along to the classes, and I can put the link to the group that's watching on YouTube too, so they'll see that. No need to do it in the chat. All good.
All right, let's do it.
Cool. All right, let's go to Miss Gail's class. If you guys have a question, come on up. Yeah, you're good.
What is the world's water most used for?
Sorry, what was that question?
What is the world's water most used for?
Good question. All right. Well, in California is a really good example of this. In California, 80% of the water is used to grow food. So that water goes straight down the streams into farmers' fields, and they flood irrigate, or they irrigate with sprinklers, and they grow rice and they grow citrus. And some of the crops are really water intensive. Your salad greens, your broccoli, your almonds. Think about this. A single almond actually takes a gallon of water. So a big milk container's worth of water to grow a single almond. So when you throw a bunch of almonds in your mouth, imagine how much water it's taken to grow those. So the biggest use of water is agriculture. And, you know, that's really important because that's our food supply. So the cities and the towns, that's probably 30%, 20 to 30% of the water supply is used through there. But, you know, we need a lot of water to grow food. And that's kind of the focus of a lot of where the sustainable use of water is. And that's why the USGS are really focusing on farms at the moment. Great question.
It is. All right, before we go to our last question from a class, just because it might not be addressed and I really want it to be an issue that classes know about, can you tell us a little bit about what's happening in Cape Town?
Yeah, you brought that up. Okay, so I've been put on the spot because I don't work with Cape Town, but I've been reading the newspaper articles, and it's this really scary situation where this town is right down the bottom of South Africa, and it's quite a dry, arid climate. So they rely on rainfall. They don't have much groundwater. It's rock very close to the surface. They get a lot of their water from the rain, and they use 1 or 2 reservoirs, which is the entire city's supply. So that big lake I showed you early on, that lake for them has dropped down because their rain is simply hasn't come for years upon years on end. So the big problem they're facing now is that they've run out of water for the entire city. So when you run out of water, what do? Well, they're trucking in water. People are having to really conserve. They're having to fill up their bathtubs at home to make sure that, you know, that's their water supply for a few days. They're not washing. It's this crazy stage that it's got to where the droughts have really had an impact and they no longer have their water. So they're waiting for the next rains to come, and they're now trying to sort of, I guess they're trying to solve the problem longer term because they're doing everything as sustainable as they can, but the climate has really changed their rainfall. And so now they're having to be more creative. Just like the question before, they're looking to desalinate water. It's expensive though, so it's this trade-off. But these are things we can all learn from Cape Town because we can go, well, gee, I hope that never happens to us. Let's plan this out. If things get really dry in future, let's work out where we can get water from and become an environmental engineer and help to solve these problems yourself as well.
Awesome. Yeah, so that's a much better solution than what some cities are doing, where they literally are just saying, gee, we hope this doesn't happen to us. So we need people to work on things like that. So
yeah, totally.
All right. Let's go to Ms. Ball's class. You guys just need to mute your own mic, but then go for it.
Were you the one who actually took the pictures in the ocean when you were in there and took the pictures of all the fish and stuff?
Yeah, that's a good question. I took the pictures of the fish. That big shark picture, the super scary one that was just this big black shape of a great white shark, that was actually my dad. He flies the surf rescue helicopter, and they do shark patrols up the coast. So every day he'll fly up the coast and back, and he sends the coolest pictures to us of sharks like chasing seals and big hammerhead sharks and blue whales. So I always get this sort of stream of these really cool ocean pictures coming along. But that rockfish that you saw, he was, I almost stood on him and someone pointed him out, and then I took a picture of him and I still couldn't see it. Someone needed to point the fish out to me to show me where it was. So I took that one, but yeah, good question.
Awesome. All right, we're going a little long, so what we do at the end of every Hangout, Simon, is I'm going to demute every class's mic, and so Mr. Espress, Miss Evans, Miss Lewis, if you guys could join me in saying a big thank you to Simon for joining us today. So thank you, Simon.
Thank you.
All right. One kid got like super into that. I love it. All right, Simon, that was awesome. Thanks so much. Really detailed, great presentation. And again, you're welcome back anytime. We'd love to have you.
Awesome. Thanks, guys, and happy World Water